Hey, this is your host, Rob Keats of 𝙂𝙊𝙇𝘿. It is Thursday, September 29th, 2022. We have switched up and are doing our lives on Thursday this week due to travel. Welcome everybody to the program. Thanks for joining. We're going to let everything load and I'm going to do a sound check before we get started. As a little bit of housekeeping reminder, we do have a poll up. The poll is, are the bad actors in the gold and silver markets really being discovered and their actions addressed? I've got 4 answers there for you. The topic of today's video is the most important thing about gold and silver that nobody ever taught you. And the reason I want to bring this to you today is because we did an investigation. I think you guys are going to be very interested in seeing the results. And what we did today, what we have done for the video today is we've talked with a former deputy director with both FERC, which is an energy commission, and the CFTC on manipulation. This gentleman gave a presentation at the Silver Symposium recently, and I also had the honor and privilege of interviewing him at the same event as well. A lot of what he talked about here echoes what we have been saying on the program for quite some time. And it's nice to see that we have a former assistant director confirming those things. This might be the first time on record, though a lot of these things have been talked about. At least it's going to make it out into general media. It might have been talked about behind closed doors, perhaps. It's the first time I've heard of it. Things I've suspected for a long time. And I think you guys are going to be super interested. Okay, I think we have everybody loaded in. We're going to go ahead and get started. Today, we start a new series. It is a series on the mysteries of the precious metals markets and why they occur. We delve deep in the precious metals to determine how the markets work, whom those markets serve, and how. But most importantly, we do it to determine who is really benefiting from these markets in the end. Are we the people benefiting, or is the market really set up to benefit the dominant market-making institutions at the expense of everybody else? We discuss this and more in this new Mystery Solved series covering how the precious metals markets really work. So as my opening script will tell you, we're going to do a couple of parts on this. This may go longer, but at least 2 parts on this. And we're going to take our time on it and give a lot of commentary because I think you guys would be super, super interested. So without further ado, we're going to go hit the first video. And I'm going to play videos from the conference, and then I'm going to comment on it and tell you what I think the significance of those videos are. I think you'll find this all to be just hugely interesting. Before we get into the details, I wanted to bring you our preferred provider for the program, which is Kinesis. Here we have the dashboard, my dashboard on Kinesis. And you can see on Kinesis, you can either buy KAUs or KAGs for gold and silver. You can also trade in Bitcoin, Ethereum, Tether, Bitcoin Cash, Litecoin, Dash, XRP, Stellar, and XinFin if you're interested in the crypto complex. You can also manage your accounts from the left-hand side. I've been using this for quite a while, have loved the product and wanted to make them a preferred provider for the program, as well as showing you guys. So if you're interested in Kinesis Money, we'll have a link down in the description that's a refers link that you can use if you wish. Okay, without further ado, getting on to the interview with Matthew Hunter, former deputy director at FERC and the CFTC. This was done at the 2022 Stockpole Silver Symposium. I've downloaded the videos from YouTube and we're going to play them here so we get it without interruption. And the first section is really talking about, or is introducing Matt Hunter and his credentials. I want to establish the credentials of the guest before we get into what he's actually saying. This will go a couple of minutes, but just listen to his credentials. This guy has a lot of experience in the precious metals market and seems to know exactly what he's talking about. Here we go.
When I started this years ago at the Federal Energy Regulatory Commission, where I was a subject matter expert, having been years ago during the California energy crisis, that I actually would find bad guys. And industry doesn't like when you find bad guys. So I'm going to tell you some of my history really quickly to try to establish some level of trust. Let's see if this works. Yeah, so I'm going to do this as fast. I have like 12 slides about who I am, and I'm going to try to do it in 30 seconds. I have done everything in commodities. I am one of the remaining or last living apprentices. I started in a vault for coins in New York and did every job. So I walked gold, silver, numismatics around the streets of New York. I became the assistant vault manager. It was a big promotion. I became a coin trader. I traded coins for years for 𝙂𝙊𝙇𝘿 Metals and Federal Coin and Currency. I did COMEX arbitrage, which is, I was the floor clerk on the old COMEX when they wrote on the boards rather than having electronic trade boards. I did the reconciliation of COMEX trades on the floor. I traded foreign exchange. I did IMM piggyback arbitrage against the dealer market. I was an arbitrager of gold products of exchange versus exchange, so I did Winnipeg versus Chicago, Chicago against New York, and any other place that I could find an arbitrage. I became 𝙂𝙊𝙇𝘿 Metals manager of gold bullion and foreign exchange and the chief gold trader. I was 28 years old. I had 28 people working for me. That was fun. I have to say that was a tremendous ego boost to be a personage in the gold market. I went down to the floor to run the options book. I became senior precious metals trader at Credit Suisse. I traded at 𝙎𝙄𝙀𝙇𝙍 Metals for several years. Twice, I was the director of dealing for 𝙎𝙂𝙇𝙇, then back to 𝙎𝙄𝙃, and then Lehman Brothers. This is Lehman before the Lehman collapse. Lehman was in commodities for years and then it exited. And then I changed my career and I became a power trader. Power trading is much more difficult than trading. It's the hardest commodity in the world to trade, electricity. And I became a California power trader. I worked for Constellation, and Constellation at the time was a joint venture between Goldman Sachs and Baltimore Gas and Electric. And then I went to the government, and I was the subject matter expert for the Federal Energy Regulatory Commission, and ultimately I became the authority of how to find manipulation in energy markets. From there, I joined the CFTC, was hired essentially by Gary Gensler, to change the orientation of the surveillance group. Surveillance at CFTC prior to my arriving was focused on trade practice abuses, which is, did you fill out your cards on the floor correctly? And explaining market events. And I changed that to, we're a data-centric organization. We have the best data. We should be able to tell the world what happened from the data and not from a Reuters report.
Okay, so I'm going to play another video, but real quickly, I wanted to establish his credentials. This is where I interviewed him separately on the next day in a session, and he's going to talk about what he did at CFTC. So stick with us. We're almost done with the introductory part, and then we will get into the juicy details of what he revealed about the CFTC and their ability to regulate the precious metals market at Silver Symposium in Washington.
Okay. My name is Matthew Hunter. I'm retired
in
now.
Washington.
I'd spent my early career, about 30 years, in precious metals. I started in the vault. I did gold and silver coins for Federal Coin and Currency and 𝙂𝙊𝙇𝘿 Metals before 𝙂𝙊𝙇𝘿 Metals became Bank of Nova Scotia. I traded. I'm Wall Street trained in arbitrage for foreign exchange precious metals, and I spent the last 20 years of my career in the federal government. And I spent essentially the last 10 years of my career as the deputy director of surveillance for the CFTC. So I'm the guy that was responsible for detecting market manipulation and other infractions of CFTC and exchange rules. And that's really where my expertise is, in how to find bad actors, reasonably successful at that, and the limitations of the data streams that are available to government to do that kind of work.
Okay, so I want to stop it right there. Took a long time to get into it, but we've established who he is. He claims to be the CFTC assistant director that was responsible for doing, I guess, essentially surveillance or detecting of things that went on in the market. And so we got the right guy, and we interviewed this guy, as well as we're going to show you elements of his presentation. And we're going to do this in a couple of videos. We're not going to do it all at once. I really want to walk through some of the detail. In the second video I do in this, we're going to talk a little bit more about my own research, and we're going to add that back in. But we've established who he is. So let's go really quickly in the share to what he said at the conference and why this is so very important and why you need to know this if you're in the precious metals markets. I will get this queued up. We are going to start at the 6:33 mark of video 1. And here we go.
To get on the same page,
and here we go.
I believe this. Every market can be manipulated. Every single one. My experience is that if you start turning over rocks, you're going to find slugs. The question is the slug acting in a legal or an illegal manner? Right? But there are bad actors. There are bad actors everywhere. And this is my primary driver. He said, if we look, we're going to find. Someone is likely trying to manipulate, and attempted manipulation in my world is manipulation, to alter a market or a product for profit, for gain at some time. So you think about the size of the markets, and we'll talk about markets in a moment, the size of the markets. 90,000, 100,000 futures contracts that are listed, add the options on top of that, add all the open swaps on top of that, and say, how big is the world? Everything is trading down to the millisecond level. Someone, someplace, is going to try to trade for effect to enhance the value of something in their portfolio. Is it happening 24 hours, 7 in all markets? No. Does it happen regularly in markets? Absolutely. Not every market is manipulated every day. Not every piece of information in the market contributes to a manipulation. But it's out there often enough.
All right, so the point he's trying to make there, and I'll come back on screen, is that every market can be manipulated. Of course, we've seen the fines, and we'll get into the history of that at Deutsche Bank and JP Morgan, I think Morgan Stanley at one point, in the precious metal space, not all in the futures, but just around precious metals. And we've seen the fine, JP Morgan, part of that was for treasuries last year. So we know, I think we all know the markets are manipulated, but he said a couple of things I found interesting. He said, yes, somebody could affect manipulation, and yes, they probably tried to every day. He said he didn't think every market was manipulated 24/7. I think that depends upon the order flow, and given some comments we're going to see him make later in both his presentation and in our interview, I'm not sure he can make that claim that the markets aren't manipulated 24/7, because he's going to explain how hard it is for them actually to detect manipulation. And that's what we're going to go to next on video 2. We're going to talk about how they detect the manipulation. Stay tuned and listen to this. It's very important that you understand what you are about to hear for this market from a former deputy director of the CFTC, giving this at a public conference, Silver Symposium in Washington, not too long ago. We're going to start that video right now, and it starts at the 4:40 mark. We'll get as close as we can. Here we go. 5 grams of silver on a card. If you guys have questions, I'll give these away.
I'm in agreement. So when I was in government, I argued often, for instance, to have a real discussion about silver, to have an open discussion. There are things you can't share. The material comes from what's called Section 8.
Sorry about that. We didn't get that share going quite correct, so we're going to do it again. Here we go.
I'm in agreement. So when I was in government, I argued often, for
We're gonna do it
instance,
again. Here
to
we go.
have a real discussion about silver, to have an open discussion. There are things you can't share. The material comes from what's called Section 8 within the CFTC regulations, and that's confidential. So you can't talk about confidential things. But you can talk about process. You can talk about how you view data, so that when somebody says, as I said in one of the other presentations, Vanity Fair wrote an article that said that the S&P 500 was being manipulated regularly, and that government says it can see the activity, and then silence. And I said, we should say, yes, we can see the activity. And the article is wrong for these reasons, right? Not to say that the article was written in bad faith. It's to say, since you can see confidential information, I can see it. People will call me. I'll give you an example. I'm trading cattle. When I place my order, someone always seems to run in front of it. And I said, great. Tell me the time and day that you traded, and I will look for you, because small players, I have account numbers, right? But any major market participant or reporting participant, I have their name. So if you tell me that you were trading at 9 o'clock on Thursday, I will find your order, and I will look at the message data to see if somebody is intentionally running ahead of you. And I can look now at your history of orders to see if there is some sort of activity that conforms to your observation. Because I would say to my staff, the first thing you do is, can we see what the observer says they saw? All
right, so I'm going to stop it right there. And the point I wanted to make on this one was, he's describing their process for detecting manipulation, which involves them having a suspect pointed out to them in some external process saying, oh, we think it's manipulated, and then we're going to investigate that specific case. Notice how he doesn't say that there's automation around this. He will go on later on to say that they have built a detection engine, which will cover that. I want to make sure that's covered in full detail, but a lot of the processes are still manual, even that detection engine. And this is something that I saw in cybersecurity. When you're looking across a population of events, looking for bad actors, it's very difficult just to buy software off the shelf to do this. A lot of this is customized software. A lot of it doesn't get developed for all use cases. Most of the time, it takes a lot of manual intervention and sifting through data to make correlations and things like that. An investigation, it sounds like, into bad actors doing market malfeasance in the commodity sector, which includes all the commodities and precious metals. It seems as though that falls under the same level of maturity overall as of detection in a lot of things, where it's still manual. And we'll get into resources here in a moment. There's a question I asked him about that. We'll get there. It's just, it goes to show that even though there's a regulatory agency, they don't have all the tools and people that they need. He's going to go on in the next clip, in the first video in his presentation at the conference, to talk about the burden of proof to get the legal agencies up and moving around this. Let's go ahead and get that started real quickly and go back to the videos. Go back to the first one, and I think it's at the 828 mark. So we're going to go over here, fast forward to 828, and we'll get him basically telling us what the burden of proof actually is.
But it's out there often enough. With data, when you have a complete data set, and we can talk about what complete means. When you have a complete data set, you can uncover everything. There is a difficulty, and that is, can we convince an attorney that they can convince a finder of fact, a judge or a jury, that what we observe in the data is a strong enough claim to get a conviction? And that is a much harder bar. But I can see in the data quite regularly the incentive to manipulate and the actions in the market that are the manipulation. So now we have to talk about what's the market. Obviously, CFTC says the market's...
All All right, so there he's basically pointing out, and the point that segment really talked about was it's going to take a really long time to do an investigation. The detection engine does not do that. It requires people studying the market and is anticipating based on experience what is an attempted or successful manipulation. We're going to play the video even more where he's going to talk about detecting manipulation, how they look at the markets, and how they would do an investigation. So this will go on for a couple minutes.
Are futures and options on futures. And it gets a little more complicated.
So this,
you got swaps and swaptions. And it gets a little more complicated again. And this is what you care about. The physical trades, and I'd say contracts, agreements, and transfers. To understand a portfolio of anybody, you have to understand all the pieces. You can't just say, I'm looking at futures. If you only look at futures, you cannot find manipulation. If you only look at futures, you might be able to find spoofing, but you cannot find manipulation. You think of it, think of the portfolio as a three-legged stool. It's got physical, whatever physical means. It could be ETFs, right? Other securities, physical transactions, agreements for transfer, transportation agreements, shipping agreements, whatever they've got, refining agreements, swaps and swaptions, and then the futures market. It's incredibly complex, and for some firms, if someone says, oh, I have 50 million lines of transactions to give you for a 2-year period of trades, and you go, okay, yeah, that's about right. The major market participants have fabulous amounts of volume that gets transacted. So putting it all back into a coherent package so that the analyst can understand the portfolio of the actor as well as the actor understood his own portfolio on the day that it was transacted, that the transactions took place. That's a task, and that can take years.
All right, so what I wanted to point out here is what he's saying. It can take absolute years to basically do an investigation and prove out whether somebody or not was acting in a bad capacity. And we're talking about a single investigation. We're not talking about monitoring the market at the whole time. It's basically painfully clear that the CFTC, and I've said this before, does not have the teeth of enforcement and does not have the resources to detect and identify those events all the time when they happen, unless they're led to it by something or someone or some reason, but they're not just detecting by themselves. And this is very analogous to a lot of detection schemes in IT and security as well. And I'm making that analogy because most of what goes on out there on a transactional basis, whether it's financial or even technical, isn't really being monitored at the level that people think. There's an admission that the government doesn't have enough resources to monitor everything or catch all the bad actors or the attempts at manipulation. And from the commentary by Matt, it appears that the commodities regulator is severely understaffed to catch all the bad activity. Second, it's important to point out that while a detection agent has been built, it requires massive amounts of human work to make that effective. There's no widespread automated detection and attribution systems for the commodities markets, at least on behalf of the CFTC, and not another one that we're aware of that exists. It wasn't talked about in these presentations, and I didn't see it on the CFTC's website. So if there is out there, somebody independent is doing that, please, send information over to me. I'd love to look at it. But in terms of the agency that was tasked with that, it's obvious that they don't have the right resources, the right engine, and they're not going to be able to find those as they happen. And that when they do find something, because of all the data and because of the intensive process, it could take years for them basically to do it. There's no system set up and there's no process or thought around targeting a specific market actor or to track, say, a book of trades for a specific market actor for them without a separate multi-year investigation that have to occur. So that's a big part of the issue with the commodities markets and how they're manipulated. So when people tell you essentially that because we have a regulator that market can be regulated, the testimony that we've looked at today from the assistant director of the CFTC, who was responsible for doing that type of investigation for the precious metals markets and the rest of the commodities markets in his role, basically admitted, yeah, they can't do that. There is a lot more to this series, by the way. I'll have some more commentary on it. We're going to go deeper into these conversations, and I'm also going to bring in some outside research, and I'm going to tie this all together in the next episode for why I think this is so important. It's the most important thing about gold and silver nobody ever told you. People focus on the price all the time. The price is a mechanism of a derivative market, which is largely not physically settled. These trades are made in a market which averages about every 2 months some physical settlement. There's about 6 delivery months every year for both gold and silver, but they trade almost 24/7 across the world and on the different markets, and the prices are set there. And we know that those prices are not true because we've seen the way that the metals react to market conditions and to economic conditions, which don't make a lot of sense. And here we have an admission in public at a precious metals conference, prominent one in Spokane, Washington, that the CFTC doesn't have the right detection tools, mechanisms, or people. He mentioned that he had 12 people working with him at the CFTC, if I recall correctly, and he needed many, many more. I believe he mentions also in his speeches that at FERC, which is an energy regulatory commission, they said if you want to catch everything, he needs 2,000 people. He only had 69. So staffing and the tools and all of that matters. And that's what the first part of this investigation has uncovered, that this market cannot be appropriately regulated to the rules because the detection and enforcement mechanisms just aren't there. Again, we've got a lot more in this. We're going to go through that in a second episode, but wanted to make sure that you guys understood, why these markets aren't regulated, why we talk about manipulation all the time, why there is no one in government or any other market commentator, no matter how much they are respected and revered, that can tell you that these markets cannot and have not been manipulated. Because I'll flip the director's comments on the other side for those who are pessimistic about manipulation. If he is saying that they cannot detect all cases of manipulation because they don't have the right resources to do so, they may have data, but it requires a lot of investigation afterwards. And how long do they even keep that data for before it's erased? Or a question about how far back they could go. But if you flip that on its head, it also means that all the trades could not also be confirmed legitimate, because if you can't confirm malfeasance for lack of resources, you cannot confirm legitimacy. Two sides of the same token. And so therefore, nobody can tell you that the market is 100% legitimate. If they can't show you the places where it's illegitimate, it means they can't show you the places where it is legitimate, because it's either is or is not. And all you have to do is prove one or the other. They can't prove either. So this just adds a lot of fuel to the fire for the argument about precious metals manipulation. And again, there's more. Because I was in that meeting with him on the second day, and we were there talking, I was able to ask him questions I would have asked as an auditor, because I have auditor experience. And some of these questions, I think, are questions that probably have never been asked in public about these markets. And these answers, I think, are going to pretty much shock you. Maybe not surprise you, but they'll shock you when you think about the ramifications over one of the largest markets in the world in the commodities, and the ability of the regulator to maintain that market, avoiding manipulation. And I'll remind you, manipulation can occur domestically, manipulation can occur internationally, and a lot of the data about who's actually trading these is hidden on ledgers of individual market makers and bullion banks that I don't believe the CFTCs, unless they request to do some sort of audit. So again, cannot prove every transaction is manipulated, also means cannot prove every transaction is legitimate. Thank you, Timothy Clark, for supporting the program. We do appreciate that very much. It really does help the program. It helps us do the research that we do. We're going to do a final readout on the poll. Poll question for today was, are the bad actors in the gold and silver markets really being discovered and their actions addressed? 7% of you said all of it's being covered. 52% said none at all. 37% said some of them are being discovered, and 5% a large portion. Thank you guys for voting in the poll. Thank you, everybody, for joining. We are not done yet, ladies and gentlemen. Remember, when you come to Gold Silver Pros, it's not just a conversation, it's an investigation. And we have more to this investigation, a lot more that we're going to bring to you next week as well. Reminder that memberships are available for those of you that want to support us on the channel. And the next Rob Unfiltered is coming out this Friday, where I'm going to talk about this space question. And you'll have to become a member and tune in if you want to know more. But we're going to tie what's going on with the space race to commodities and to the economy. And I think we're going to make some pretty interesting observations about what's really going on. And it'll really inform everybody about the motivations for everything else that's going on geopolitically in the economy. We're going to talk about that this Friday in Rob Keent's Unfiltered, the space question. You can get that if you support the program as a member. Lastly, I want to recommend that you review my latest chat with Chris Marcus of Arcadia Economics, where we discuss the 3 reasons that we expect gold and silver to outperform the stock market over the next 20 years. And also check out our new top 5 playlist and our new playlist selection we have available for you to view on the website. Thank you, everybody, for joining the program. Oh, I got one more coming in. Steve Rossholm come in at the end with a question. Thank you, Steve, for the question. It says, Glint and Stacker Store your allocated PM for free. Kinesis actually pays you. I rarely get something for nothing. What are we giving up to get this free storage? Greater risk. Steve, my understanding of the Kinesis system from talking with them many times and reading the white papers is that there are transaction fees. A portion of those transaction fees go to credits for holders and mentors and various things like that. They have not rolled out the entire contribution program for all of their different yields that they're going to give you, holders yield and stuff like that, but some are being rolled out and others are being rolled out, you know, as we speak, and they'll get them all there, but it's through the transactions of the system. The system is designed to reward people actually transacting and not just hodling, because that means the gold and silver flows, and that creates an economic system. So because they charge the fees, people want to transact with them, and it rewards people who mint and hold and do other things. It's supposed to be a self-supporting ecosystem, and so far it has gone off quite well. Thank you, 𝙂𝙍𝙊𝙎, for becoming a supporter of the channel. Again, greatly appreciated. Thank you guys so much for supporting us. This is going to conclude the first part, but pay attention and stay tuned for the next part that's coming up. And we have other videos on the channel for you, revamped our playlist. So stay on the channel and go over more. Might I recommend the Perth Mint video series, which talks about the corruption of the Perth Mint. It is another interesting mystery that we solved last year, and really was our first mystery investigation into the gold and silver markets. This is our second. And this was the first part of the most important thing about gold and silver nobody ever told you. Click to watch more videos. Thank you, everybody, again, for attending tonight's live stream.